The cold steel of St. Jude's operating table bit into my spine as my husband, Dr. Adrian Vance, no, Adrian Croft, leaned down. He didn't kiss me. He adjusted my oxygen mask, his eyes devoid of warmth. "Your kidney will save Clara, Evelyn," he whispered. "You always said you'd die for me. Now prove it." The smell of antiseptic and burnt flesh is something you never truly wash out of your skin. It clings to the back of your throat, metallic and thick, a permanent reminder of the day your world ended. For me, that day was October 14th, 2024. I was Evelyn Reynolds, a 32-year-old architectural designer whose only crime was loving a monster. Adrian Croft had been my husband for 4 years. We lived in a stunning minimalist brownstone on 74th Street in Manhattan, a property bought entirely with my inheritance from my late father. I thought we were building a life. I thought the late nights he spent at St. Jude's Medical Center were dedicated to his rising career as a cardiothoracic surgeon. I didn't know he was building a mausoleum for me. It started with the fatigue, a slow, draining lethargy that crept into my limbs after my morning coffee. Adrian would always hand it to me in my favorite blue ceramic mug, kissing my forehead, telling me I was working too hard on the Brooklyn waterfront project. "Drink up, Evie," he'd murmur, his voice a smooth baritone that used to soothe my anxieties. "You need your strength." I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. When my vision started blurring in the afternoons, he volunteered to run my blood work himself at his private clinic. He came home with a somber face, clutching a manila folder. He told me I had a rare, aggressive autoimmune disorder affecting my kidneys. He said he had found an experimental trial that could save me. The night I signed the papers, the rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our living room. I remember the heavy weight of the fountain pen in my hand, the thick texture of the parchment. I didn't read the fine print. You don't audit the man who holds you while you cry. 2 days later, I woke up in a dim, unmarked room in the basement level of St. Jude's. Not the pristine recovery wings, but the sub-basement where the old archives were kept. My limbs felt like lead. Heavy leather restraints bound my wrists and ankles to a rusty surgical gurney. The air was freezing, smelling of damp concrete and old blood. When the heavy steel door clicked open, it wasn't just Adrian who walked in. It was Clara Montgomery, my closest friend since our days at Columbia University. She wasn't wearing her usual designer heels. She was in a sterile hospital gown, her cheeks flushed with a vibrant, sickening health. Behind them walked Dr. Thomas Albright, the chief of surgery and Adrian's mentor. "Adrian?" My voice was a cracked whisper, the plastic of the oxygen mask scratching my nose. "What's happening? I can't move." Adrian didn't look at my face. He was busy snapping on latex gloves, the sharp smack of the rubber echoing in the small room. "The trial isn't for you, Evelyn," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the tenderness he had used just 24 hours prior. "Clara's heart is failing. The autoimmune disease you have, it doesn't exist. The drugs I've been putting in your coffee were just to match your tissue compatibility with hers. You're a perfect match, not just for her heart, but your kidneys will fetch a beautiful price on the private registry to clear my gambling debts to the Valenti cartel." The words didn't make sense. The room spun. I looked at Clara, the woman who had stood as my maid of honor. "Clara, please." Clara leaned over me, her breath smelling of the peppermint candies she always sucked on. "Don't look at me like that, Evie. You've always had everything. The inheritance, the talent, the house. Adrian never loved you. He needed your money to build his reputation, and now he needs your body to save mine. Think of it as your final act of charity." I tried to scream, to thrash, but the paralytic was absolute. I could only watch as Adrian adjusted the overhead surgical lamp. The blinding white light burned my retinas. "Sedative going in?" Dr. Albright muttered from the shadows, adjusting an IV line. "Wait," Adrian said, stopping Albright's hand. He looked down at me, a cold, clinical curiosity in his eyes. "Let her stay conscious for the local block. I want her to know exactly when she loses." He picked up the scalpel. The silver blade caught the light. I felt the cold swipe of iodine on my abdomen, followed by the sharp, agonizing pressure of the blade cutting through my flesh. Because of the paralytic, I couldn't even scream to relieve the pressure. I felt the tearing of my muscles, the hot spill of my own blood pooling beneath my hips. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, a frantic rhythm that Adrian monitored on the screen beside him. "Beautiful rhythm," Adrian remarked to Albright, his hands moving with sickening precision inside my open torso. She always did have a strong heart, perfect for Clara. The pain became a white-hot sheet that consumed my consciousness. As my vision faded into a dark, suffocating void, the last thing I heard was the rhythmic, metallic clink of my organs being dropped into a stainless steel cooler, and Clara's soft, triumphant laughter. Then darkness, a crushing, absolute silence. Click. A sharp, agonizing gasp tore from my throat. My eyes flew open. The scent of antiseptic hit me first, but it wasn't the damp basement. The air was warm, smelling faintly of lavender and high-end floor wax. The light above me wasn't a single rusted bulb. It was a state-of-the-art, multi-tiered LED surgical array. I was standing. My hands were extended in front of me, covered in sterile blue latex gloves. In my right hand, I felt the unmistakable balanced weight of a custom-weighted titanium scalpel. "Dr. Reynolds, are you all right? The patient's vitals are fluctuating." The voice came from my left. I snapped my head around. A nurse in green scrubs, her name tag reading Sarah, was looking at me with intense concern. I looked down. Beneath my hands lay a patient, fully anesthetized, their chest cracked wide open, held apart by a stainless steel rib spreader. A human heart was beating frantically inside the cavity, glistening under the bright lights. I looked up at the vitals monitor. The patient's name was printed in the upper left corner in crisp digital text: Adrian Croft. My mind fractured, then fused back together with the force of a tectonic shift. I wasn't on the table. I was standing over it. I glanced at my own reflection in the polished glass of the medicine cabinet across the room. The face staring back at me wasn't my own soft, betrayed features. It was the sharp, aristocratic face of Dr. Vivian Reynolds, no relation to my past self, Saint. The recovery room at St. Jude's private wing was bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. Adrian lay in the adjustable bed, his face pale, but his vitals stable. The surgery had been a masterpiece of reconstruction. I had repaired his aorta with such flawless precision that he would make a full recovery within weeks. He needed to be healthy to feel the full weight of what was coming. I stood at the foot of his bed, wearing the white lab coat of Dr. Vivian Reynolds, a clipboard pressed against my ribs. Adrian's eyelids fluttered open. He groaned, his hand moving instinctively toward his heavily bandaged chest. When his eyes finally focused on me, there was no recognition, only the groggy, sycophantic respect a resident shows a legendary chief surgeon. Dr. Reynolds," he rasped, his throat dry from the intubation tube. Did we make it?" "You're alive, Dr. Croft," I said, my voice steady, completely devoid of the warmth I used to give him when I was his wife. I stepped closer, the heels of my leather boots clicking sharply against the linoleum. The sound made his eyes twitch. "The aneurysm was severe. A lesser surgeon would have lost you. But I ensure my patients get exactly what they deserve." "Thank you," he whispered, a weak, arrogant smile touching his lips. "I owe you everything." You have no idea, I thought. Leaving his room, I walked down the corridor toward the administrative wing. The first twist of the knife had to be financial. In my past life, Adrian had used my inheritance to pay off his massive hidden gambling debts to the Valenti cartel, all while keeping me on a strict budget, claiming we were saving for our future children. I pulled out my phone, Vivian's phone, and dialed a private number. Vivian Reynolds wasn't just a surgeon. Her family owned a significant share of the private equity firm that funded St. Jude's. She had resources I could only dream of in my past life. "Marcus," I said when the call connected, "I need the financial audits for senior resident Adrian Croft. Look into his offshore accounts tied to the illegal sports books in Macau. And Marcus, leak his current debt ledger to the Chief of Internal Compliance, anonymously." "Right away, Dr. Reynolds," the broker replied. Next came the personal front. The Evelyn of this timeline was currently 21, a brilliant architecture student at Columbia, completely unaware that in 3 months she would meet Adrian Croft at a university charity gala and begin her descent into hell. I couldn't just approach her. If I interfered directly with her life, she might think I was a lunatic. I had to insulate her from him entirely, removing his ability to ever access her fortune or her trust. The next morning, I drove to the historic brownstone on 74th Street. In this timeline, it still belonged to my father, Arthur Reynolds, who was very much alive, though his heart condition was worsening, the very condition Adrian would later exploit to gain his trust before my father passed away. I bypassed the front gate, using the consultant credentials Vivian possessed to request a private medical consultation with Arthur Reynolds regarding his upcoming cardiac assessment. When I entered the grand study, the smell of old paper and my father's favorite Cavendish pipe tobacco nearly broke my composure. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. My father sat in his leather armchair, looking frail but sharp. "Dr. Reynolds," my father said, standing up to shake my hand. "It's an honor. The chief of surgery herself handling my consult?" "Mr. Reynolds," I said, keeping my hands perfectly steady as I opened his medical file. "I took a personal interest in your case. Your current cardiologist, Dr. Albright, has been recommending a specific pharmaceutical regimen. I am here to tell you to terminate his services immediately." My father frowned, his brow furrowing. "Thomas Albright has been a family friend for years. Why would I do that?" "Because Dr. Albright is receiving substantial kickbacks from a pharmaceutical entity that is currently under federal investigation for falsifying clinical trial data regarding cardiac stress line management," I said, placing a stack of verified financial disclosures on his mahogany desk. The papers landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Furthermore, he has been positioning one of his residents, an Adrian Croft, to take over your private care. If you look at these documents, you will see that Dr. Croft's medical license in his previous state was flagged for unauthorized narcotic administration." My father picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the data. The color drained from his face. This is monstrous. Thomas would never—" "Look at the signatures, Mr. Reynolds," I said softly, but with the cold weight of a judge passing sentence. "The signatures don't lie. I suggest you move your assets and your medical care to the Presbyterian network immediately. And for the safety of your daughter, Evelyn, I suggest you place her inheritance into a strict, irrevocable blind trust that cannot be accessed by any future spouse without a 10-year vetting period by an independent board. My father looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude. Why are you doing this for us, Doctor? I looked around the room, at the portrait of my mother on the wall, at the small silver-framed photo of myself as a college student on the mantelpiece. Let's just say I dislike seeing good people dissected by parasites. By the end of the week, the traps were set, and my enemies were completely oblivious, walking blindly into the invisible walls I was constructing around them. Adrian returned to the hospital 2 weeks later, walking with a slight limp, his chest still tender. He immediately went to Chief Albright's office to secure his promotion to the prestigious Cardiac Research Fellowship, the fellowship that would give him the authority to run the fake clinical trials he had used to poison me in my past life. I stood outside the frosted glass door of Albright's office, watching their shadows. Adrian walked in, his shoulders back, his expression brimming with the smug confidence of a man who thought his path to power was cleared. He offered his hand to Albright. Albright didn't take it. Instead, he threw a heavy manila folder across the desk, the papers scattered across the floor, right at Adrian's feet. "What is this, Thomas?" Adrian laughed nervously, his hands dropping to his sides, his fingers twitching against his trousers. "The Internal Compliance Board just received a full disclosure of your gambling debts, Adrian," Albright said, his voice shaking with a mix of rage and terror. $2 million to the Valenti family, and they found out you've been using the hospital's private pharmacy account to order synthetic paralytics under my DEA registration number. Adrian spent the next 48 hours like a rat in a flooded sewer. He couldn't go back to his apartment. The Valenti cartel's collection agents were already parked in a black Cadillac Escalade outside his building on 82nd Street. He had no idea how his secret ledgers had leaked, or why the hospital's compliance department was suddenly auditing every milligram of succinylcholine he had ever requisitioned. He did the only thing a parasite knows how to do when its host is threatened. He looked for a new source of blood. But when he tried to contact the 21-year-old Evelyn Reynolds, the naive architecture student he had targeted in my previous life, he found an impenetrable wall. He showed up at the Columbia campus, only to be stopped at the gates by private security guards who handed him a formal, notarized cease-and-desist letter. My father had acting security details monitoring her every move, and the irrevocable blind trust was locked tighter than a vault. Adrian was drowning, and the water was rising fast. That was when I decided to throw him a life preserver made of lead. I arranged a private meeting with him in the observation gallery, overlooking Operating Room 4, the very room where, in another timeline, he had planned to harvest my organs. The room was empty, bathed in the eerie blue glow of the nocturnal cleaning lights. When Adrian walked in, he looked 10 years older. His designer scrubs were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands, those hands he was so proud of, were visibly trembling. "Dr. Reynolds," he said, his voice cracking as he closed the heavy door behind him. The lock clicked shut with a sharp, metallic sound that made him jump. "Thank you for meeting me. I'm in a desperate situation. Chief Albright has betrayed me. He's trying to pin his own pharmaceutical liabilities on me. If the board revokes my residency, I'm finished." I didn't turn around to look at him immediately. I stood with my hands resting on the stainless steel railing of the observation deck, looking down at the cold operating table below. "You're a talented surgeon, Adrian," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "It would be a tragedy to see such precise hands go to waste. What if I told you there was a way to clear your debts and secure your research fellowship, all in one night?" He took a step closer, his breath catching. "How?" "I'll do anything. Literally anything." "There is a private patient," I said, turning slowly to face him. The blue light caught the sharp angles of Vivian's face, casting deep, menacing shadows across my eyes. "A wealthy foreign national currently admitted under a pseudonym in the Fuivenpi Pavilion. She requires an urgent, off-the-record organ transplant. Specifically, a kidney. The donor tissue has already been procured through unorthodox channels, but the surgeon who was supposed to perform the extraction and immediate transplant has backed out due to cold feet." Adrian's chest heaved. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "An illegal transplant? Dr. Reynolds, that's a felony. If I get caught, if you don't do it, the Valenti family will have your hands broken by tomorrow morning, and the hospital board will strip your license by noon," I cut in, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper that seemed to vibrate in the small room. "But if you do this, my family's private equity firm will quietly absorb your outstanding debt. And Chief Albright, I will personally ensure he is forced into early retirement, leaving the fellowship chair wide open for you." The temptation was a physical weight in the room. I could see the exact moment the poison of greed and survival overtook his remaining thread of morality. The trembling in his hands stopped. His jaw set into that familiar, arrogant line I had seen right before he killed me. "Who is the donor?" he whispered. "A young woman," I replied, staring directly into his eyes. "An matching donor who volunteered under a private contract. The extraction will take place tonight at midnight in the sub-basement surgical suite. Albright's private registry is already set up there. You know the room." His eyes widened slightly. Then a slow, sickening smile spread across his face. "Yes, I know the room." "Good," I said, stepping past him towards the door. "Don't be late, Adrian. Opportunity only knocks once." As the door clicked shut behind me, I pulled out my phone and dialed Chief Albright's private number. "Thomas," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured urgency. "It's Vivian. We have an emergency. I just caught Adrian Croft stealing high-grade anesthetics and surgical equipment from the central supply. He's heading down to the old sub-basement archive vaults right now. I think he's trying to destroy the digital compliance records stored on the legacy servers down there to cover his tracks." On the other end of the line, I heard Albright gasp, followed by the frantic rustling of keys. "That idiot! I knew he was desperate, but this is suicide. I'm on my way." "I'll meet you down there," I said, and hung up. The sub-basement of St. Jude's was just as cold and damp as I remembered. The smell of concrete and old blood hung heavy in the air. I slipped into the dark observation anteroom, adjacent to the unmarked surgical suite, watching through the one-way glass. Adrian was already there. He had prepped the room, setting out the surgical trays. The silver scalpels and rib spreaders glistened under the single, harsh overhead light. He was standing by the gurney, humming a soft, discordant tune as he checked the pressure on the oxygen tanks. The heavy steel door of the suite burst open. But it wasn't the donor who walked in. It was Chief Albright, red-faced and panting, clutching his chest as he glared at his resident. "Adrian!" Albright roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Central Supply reported. Before Albright could finish his sentence, Adrian lunged forward. He didn't hesitate. In his mind, Albright was the only thing standing between him and his salvation. He grabbed a pre-loaded syringe of high-concentration succinylcholine from the tray, the exact paralytic he had used on me, and drove the needle deep into Albright's neck. What did you—" Albright stammered, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror as his knees buckled. "You betrayed me first, Thomas," Adrian hissed, his face twisted in a manic grin as he lowered Albright's collapsing body onto the cold surgical gurney. "You were going to let them ruin me. Now you're going to save me. This room isn't on the hospital's active security grid. By the time they find you, your kidney will be in a cooler on its way to Switzerland, and my debts will be paid." The heavy steel door didn't just open. It was kicked off its magnetic latch. A dozen tactical police officers swarmed the sub-basement suite, their weapon-mounted flashlights cutting through the red gloom like searchlights. Behind them walked Detective Harrison, a seasoned lead investigator I had personally briefed 3 hours earlier with the encrypted logs of Adrian's offshore sportsbook transactions. "Hands where we can see them! Drop to your knees!" Adrian didn't even try to run. He fell to the concrete floor like a puppet whose strings had been cleanly severed. His knees hit the hard ground with a sickening, dull crack. His hands trembled violently behind his head as the zip ties were pulled tight around his wrists, biting into his skin. He looked up at me, his face wet with sweat and tears of absolute frustration. "Vivian, please. She set me up. She told me to do this." "I am the chief of cardiothoracic surgery, Dr. Croft," I said, my voice ringing out with pristine, professional authority as I stepped back to let the paramedics tend to the paralyzed but living Chief Albright. "I merely followed you down here when I noticed a highly restricted paralytic had been checked out under your terminal. I saved a life tonight. You tried to end one. But the true masterpiece of my design wasn't just catching Adrian in the act of harvesting his mentor. The first major twist was waiting for him in the hospital's main lobby. As the officers wheeled Adrian out in handcuffs, a crowd of late-night hospital staff and local reporters whom I had anonymously tipped off about a major medical corruption bust flooded the entrance. Standing right at the front of the crowd, clutching a designer leather handbag, was Clara Montgomery. She wasn't wearing a sterile gown tonight. She was dressed in a pristine white trench coat, looking every bit the high society heiress she pretended to be. When her eyes met Adrian's in handcuffs, her face twisted into an expression of utter disgust. "Adrian!" she cried out, her voice loud enough for every camera to capture. "How could you? The police showed me the ledger. You were trying to use my medical identity to mask illegal organ sales. You told me you loved me, but you were just using my cardiac condition to access black market donor registries." Adrian froze, his jaw hanging open as the reporter's flashes illuminated his pale, pathetic face. "Clara, what are you talking about? We were partners. You wanted the—" "Shut up!" Clara shrieked, backing away from him as if he were a leper. "I've never been more disgusted in my life. Detective, I've already signed the full affidavit detailing his attempts to extort my family for medical coordinates." Adrian stared at her, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Clara had turned on him instantly to save her own skin. What Adrian didn't know, the second major twist that would completely shatter his remaining sanity, was that I had visited Clara the previous evening. As Dr. Vivian Reynolds, I had presented Clara with a highly confidential, fabricated medical file. I told her that Adrian had secretly run her tissue compatibility markers, not to find her a heart, but to list her own healthy corneas, liver, and remaining kidney on the Valenti cartel's active broker list as collateral for his debts in case his primary plan failed. I showed her a forged signature of Adrian's authorizing a terminal donor match with her name on it. I had made Clara believe that the man she loved was preparing to slaughter her. She had run to the district attorney within 30 minutes of my departure, offering full state's evidence against Adrian in exchange for absolute immunity. The two parasites had torn each other apart without me having to lift a single finger. 3 months later, the trials were over. Chief Albright, permanently stripped of his medical license and facing a 10-year sentence for his role in the unauthorized drug distribution ring, had taken a plea deal. Adrian, convicted of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit illegal organ trafficking, and grand larceny, was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole at Attica Correctional Facility. But my final gift to Adrian was waiting for him in his high-security cell. Because of his severe congenital aortic aneurysm, the prison medical board had to approve a weekly cardiac monitoring protocol. Since St. Jude's was the contracted specialty provider for the state correctional system, his weekly telemetry data was routed directly to my office. On a freezing Tuesday morning, I sat in my spacious chief's office overlooking the East River. I wore a tailored grey wool suit, a cup of hot espresso resting on my desk. I opened the secure portal on my laptop and initiated a private video consultation link to the Attica Infirmary. The screen flickered. Adrian sat in a metal chair on the other side, wearing an orange jumpsuit. He looked skeletal. His hair was cropped close, his cheeks sunken, his eyes hollow and haunted. When my face appeared on his monitor, he lunged forward, his chains rattling loudly against the steel table. You did this to me. I don't know how, but you did this. You're Evelyn. I don't care what the papers say. You have her eyes. I looked at him through the screen, my expression perfectly serene, my hands resting elegantly on my lap. You should watch your blood pressure, Adrian, I said, my voice a soft, melodic whisper that traveled through the secure line. The aortic repair I performed on you last year was highly complex. During the procedure, I had to install a specialized synthetic Dacron sleeve around your ascending aorta to keep it from rupturing. He froze, his breath hitching as he stared at the screen. What did you do to me? I didn't do anything to harm you, Adrian. I am a professional. I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp expression that did not reach my eyes. But the specific sleeve I used is highly sensitive to sustained hip spikes in adrenaline. Every time your heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute, whether from rage, terror, or desperate greed, the synthetic fibers contract, mimicking the exact agonizing pressure of a massive cardiac arrest. Adrian's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. He grabbed his chest, his fingers clawing at the rough orange fabric of his jumpsuit. You're lying. You can't do that. You will live the rest of your life in a concrete box, Adrian, I continued, my voice steady and absolute. And every single time you think of escaping, every time you feel a surge of anger at your captivity, and every time you feel the panic of your own mind, your own heart will punish you. You will be a prisoner, not just of the state, but of your own chest. I stood by the window, the morning sun finally warming my face. The ghosts of my past were locked away, suffocating in the cages they built for themselves, while I stepped forward into a life entirely my own. Justice isn't a fairy tale. It's a blade forged by those brave enough to survive the dark. If you felt the cold thrill of that ultimate justice, hit like. Share this story with someone who deserves a second chance, and subscribe to follow my next rebirth.